Hello and welcome. I'm glad we have the crew joining again. So today I just wanted to briefly touch on a couple items before we hand the microphone over to Anurag. And let's see, everyone in the waiting room, there we go. All right. So first I wanted to say, share a few updates that we've been invited to talk in so many different venues at the moment. And it's kind of exciting because we just finished chatting at Cask. We'll be chatting Friday for Sura. A lot of people are looking for, here's what the messaging is around this new community that's been forming. And essentially, how can they either get involved or not? So wanted to share that. One of the things I was considering for our June talk is bringing in a variety of different communities. So for example, Cask just put out a position paper for cybersecurity, and it had quite a few other components to it too, but the cybersecurity part was obviously the part that we zeroed in on. Then there was also, there's the 800-171 toolkit group. They're putting out some things that a lot of us will be able to use and bring into our own shops. So I wanted to bring a lot of these communities into place, into this group, and kind of share what's going on with them. I'd like to see if I can reach out to the export control group and see maybe what are they talking about with the changes coming their way. Maybe we can get someone on NIST 30 or NISPalm 33, something like that, where I'd like it just to be a group of, let's share what's going on beyond our walls and the groups that we're also involved in other settings. So that brings me to the second one, where Educause security professionals, I guess it's cybersecurity, privacy professionals conference. There's a lot of letters in that, but I'm looking forward to seeing if we could do a BOF at that type of venue. And then I think this grant could cover something like appetizers at a local place. It might be nice to just have an opportunity to chat. Oh Lord, I see the mailman. We might get barking. And then I also wanted to share the best advice that I've gotten recently when talking to some others about how to build and start forming this new community. And they said, make sure you build on and off ramps into your community. And they recognize that time and the relevant experience changes as time goes around. So I wanted to make sure that that's something I put some thought into. And as Eric and I just touched on this recently, but we're going to start figuring out ways that you can come in, help out a little bit, and you know what? We're going to be happy to see you move to other items, and then maybe you'll show up again. So I just wanted to share that's something that we're thinking about and trying to bring forward.
So when you hear me speaking, right now, it's from that perspective.
There we go. Eric, do you want to talk about what's happening next month? Let me pull it down.
Yes, we can do that. So next month at our May 11 talk, we will have an overview of research compliance and how to meet federal requirements. So we'll have a good workshop that she is sort of has organized and will share the success of that. So we'll be looking forward to both of them. Karen Bell and Jody Ito will be the topic of next monthly meeting.
Thanks so much. The mailman stopped his attack, so we're good again. All right. With no further ado, I shall hand the floor back over to Anurag Shankar, and let's start learning about how to make compliance useful, front-facing documentation useful.
Okay, well, let's see if I can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so let me go ahead and see if this will work. It looks like I think this might be working. So I hide this floating controls. So yeah, so welcome to this edition of our COP webinars. And the topic that we have today, the making security and compliance documentation helpful, I will somewhat disappoint you because I'm going to talk about that at the very end of this. And my generally when I do this research security stuff, I have extreme views. So so you might find that you might not get what you were looking for here. But anyway, so why can't I move? Okay, there we go. So just a couple of words about me. I think that will explain why I take the attitude or approach that I take. I was a researcher by training, an astronomer by training, as a matter of fact. So I did that for quite a while, and then came to IU and basically started providing research computing services. Did that for about 10 years, and then for the last 15 years, I guess, I've been basically helping with research security and compliance here, developing a program here. IU is a typical big, large Arvin school, about 100,000 students, around 9 campuses statewide, with IU Bloomington being kind of the large research campus, but also the IU PUI, Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis being the combined school with IU and Purdue, and also where our large school of medicine happens to be. And I just learned, in fact, just before I got in here, that the IU School of Medicine is the biggest school of medicine in the country by number of students, which I didn't know. I figured for sure Harvard is one of those sort of fancy places that have more. But anyway, it's a large, at least in terms of number, of large school. We are the IT is fairly centralized, which has made certain things easy, I guess, and I think you'll see that. And I think while we're talking medical school. So just to give you an idea of where all this this service that we have came from, and just a general philosophy and approach that I have. Here's we got a very big grant in early 2000s, I think mid 2000s, which to the School of Medicine, and that was to accelerate genomics research. And as part of that, we were supposed to obviously provide research computing services because I assumed that they would need HPC resources and so forth to do their genomics. And so so I was sent up to basically hawk our services, and I went up there and started to talk to them about this, and they said, well, are you HIPAA compliant? And I said, what is that? And they said, you go back and learn about it and come back, and then maybe we'll speak with you. And so I came back and told my bosses that we would have to do HIPAA. They said, okay, that sounds good. You do it. Go figure it out. And so basically, I've been doing that ever since. We started the project in 2007, got research systems, quote unquote, compliant in 2009. And then I, of course, went back to the researchers and I said, yes, we have all these compliant systems. We have supercomputers, we have teraflops, we have, petabytes and all that sort of stuff. And I think it was third or fourth doctor that I spoke to said, I don't really understand this language you're speaking. So I said, well, what is this? But anyway, over time, it became quite clear that the way I was socializing this to the researchers up there, again, remember, this is the School of Medicine, so mostly doctors, was just the wrong approach. I came from HPC background, so I was dealing with usual suspects in all the years that I had been here before that. And so I assumed that they knew sort of what they were doing. I could just tell them we have these resources, and what they were saying was, no, well, what are these things good for? And so I realized there was a big language barrier there. And so I had to change that. And then the other thing I realized was, as I spoke to them, that they were really almost entirely focused on getting research done. I had a very wrong impression about the fact that these were clinical researchers, and therefore they would probably know about HIPAA and would be very, very observant of compliance and that sort of stuff. And that nothing could have been further from the truth. And I also thought, for sure, I can go to some other university, maybe Purdue, maybe go to Carolyn and say, oh, yeah, how should we do this? And I went out and I found exactly 0 such folks in central IT. And so this was a very big issue. Also, when I talked to researchers about security, it wasn't that they didn't want to do it. They said they didn't have time and said, no, we will do it if you just tell us what to do. Or in fact, it's even better if you just simply do it for us. And so, so basically what ended up happening is that I had to change my strategy. I had to learn to not say, okay, here's all the toys we have and look just how shiny they are, to basically what exactly are you trying to achieve? Because they would basically tell me, but this is what we're trying to do. Give us a big kind of button that says go in the middle of the browser, and we hit it and it does whatever we want it to do. And so it was clear to me at that point that the approach that I was using before was not going to work with this crowd. And so what I had to do was obviously to spend time understanding the use cases. And essentially we had these compliance systems, so I would understand the use cases and then basically build a solution for them. Or if they happened to have someone that could help them locally in the departments to show them that that's what they should do. So basically building compliant workflows. In time, we saw that this strategy actually worked quite well. The researchers were very happy because they didn't have to worry about this kind of stuff, and actually accelerated their research quite substantially because I was also in central IT, knew all the different folks on campus that I needed to talk to get various things, the issues that they had resolved. And so to me, it seemed like this was the way to help researchers. But again, this was a small scale kind of a thing. It was not a large service. But anyway, the number of people I helped actually were quite happy with that. Then we also we started with HIPAA. So in other words, we made our systems HIPAA compliant, which means that our documentation basically says, okay, here's all the HIPAA safeguards, and this is how we fulfill them. So it was entirely HIPAA specific. And then about 2014 or so, then I realized that the third bullet here, that there were other compliance regimes probably coming. And so what I had done for HIPAA wasn't going to help, at least the documentation wasn't going to help. And I realized actually that the purpose of all this was to do security, and so that we should use some sort of a security standard rather than doing compliance per se. So I call that moving away from compliance to security. And not knowing any better, I said, well, let's go look to see what standards are out there. And I looked at this risk management framework, 853. It seemed like, I read both of those documents, and while the catalog was large, if you read the RMF, you realize that it's not supposed to be used in the way the compliance uses it, which is that, okay, go ahead and have this entire baseline implemented. It's more like, go do your risk assessment, and then here's the catalog from which you choose to mitigate risk and that sort of thing. So we were using it that way. And again, so when we saw the new compliance regimes coming, the ones that are afflicting us all now, and these were coming to the sponsored research office, they had no clue what to do. So they were simply sending it down to the department or to the PI. The PI had even less of a clue. And so they said, well, let's give it to the IT professionals in the department. And they also didn't have any clue. And it wasn't that they didn't know about technology. The problem was the interpretation of those controls into their local context. okay, what does this mean? I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and what does it mean if it says, AC2 or whatever the control happened to be. And so it was clear at that point to me that the institution had to provide some sort of interpretation for these controls. You could not expect researchers, even IT professionals on campus, to do this on their own. The other thing that I began to see was this, obviously we all know this anti-science, anti-research kind of a movement out there. And in fact, I heard of this instance, which I think I mentioned in the Slack channel, which was that a researcher had some climate research data, long-term, climate trend data, and that data had been taken and was put on their server, which was under the desk, obviously, but did not have security controls in place. And a climate denier group broke in. All they did was change a bunch of data and then of course, left it there. And then they blamed the researcher for faking their data, which had been used to publish results. So, I mean, obviously, if someone had gone in to look at their data, they wouldn't have known that someone had changed that data. So this was actually a very big wake-up call for me, because to me it seemed like this was a much bigger problem, because it sort of, it really, basically was a threat to the research enterprise itself, rather than just these confidentiality sort of kinds of driven compliance. And so it was clear that we needed something more, especially if integrity is going to become an issue. And also there have been instances where there have been attacks, and of course that made an instrument available. Especially, I think there's a particular instance of a gravitational wave observation that was thwarted by an attack that brought a telescope in Australia down, so they couldn't get there. So of course, availability is often under attack whenever a researcher has to deal with data lost, or they're having to rebuild the system, and so you're kind of taking that time away from them. Also on campus, we didn't really have any visibility into what researchers were doing unless they came to us to use central services. And cloud was becoming a big problem because it was all over the place. We didn't have any central mechanism whereby they could leverage the cloud. And so finally we got that done, but people were still going out and potentially putting sensitive data out in public cloud without our knowledge. So all these things being true, then the question was, what the heck to do? How are we going to deal with this? And again, once I had done this HIPAA thing, somehow compliance always felt to me, one FTE doing all this for apparently for all compliance regime that were to come. And so I wasn't sure exactly how we're going to do this kind of thing. So one thing, since I had done this thing in the clinical research arena, I said, well, could we replicate this model potentially for all of IU, for all different types of compliance and research security, and then apply the lessons learned? And I was not confident that this was possible, just because I wasn't sure if this thing will scale or if anyone would care or they would come to us. Because in the past, when we tried to provide research computing services and went out, it was very difficult to socialize that. We always found people that didn't know anything about the fact that, oh, you provided that service, this service. But because situation, especially with DFARS, was getting to be so bad that we had to do something, we basically, I asked for some money and applied the lessons, which was that researchers don't have time or learn to do cybersecurity. They just want to get the research done now, like as soon as possible. And then it was interesting because Mike Korn and Sid actually gave that nice presentation. I think it was at EDUCAUSE, where they talked about the life of a researcher. This is something I knew, but most cybersecurity people, I guess, didn't know, is exactly what the pressures are on researchers. And it becomes very clear once you know that these ideas of teaching researchers cybersecurity are basically dead on arrival. So what basically happened out of all this is I was able to get some funding and launch this service. We called it SecureMyResearch because, again, knowing the impatience of researchers, I knew that it had to be like a single word that we had to lodge in their consciousness, and it couldn't be it couldn't be anything more than that. So I just wanted them to know one word, SecureMyResearch at iu.edu or .iu.edu. So that's how we actually spent a lot of time thinking about that. So what is the service? It was launched now almost 2 years ago, which is hard to believe. It's no cost. It's aimed to either reduce or completely eliminate the cybersecurity and compliance burden on researchers. I got 2 FTEs for 4 years, basically, because it was a kind of a pilot, and it was financed jointly by the vice presidents for research and IT. The other thing that I basically made sure or told people that this service could not come from a governance unit like the security office, because I had that experience before. And as soon as the researchers realized this was the security office, they just completely disengaged at that very moment. So this had to come from a neutral unit. It could not be directive. So, so we did this. And of course, in order to do this, we couldn't just go ahead and do it. It actually had to involve everyone on campus that had anything to do with research. Of course, obviously researchers and IT professionals in the department, but also anyone. And also many of these other stakeholders were going to be our customers as well, because they're not cybersecurity folks necessarily. And so sometimes, especially like research administration, that sponsored research office, these guys all need help with that as well. So all of these were involved, and this service was provided jointly. We were the front end, the CSER, which is kind of a non-governance body here. We are mostly outward looking. If you know about Trusted CI, we are the consultants for National Science cybersecurity consultants for National Science Foundation funded research. So I'm actually the only one that's sort of inward looking at IU within the organization. So before I talk about the research, I have to say that at this point, I think now it's almost 2 years, so I have newer metrics than this, but the first year metric showed, it basically broke all my expectations. And actually, I did not realize that this was such a huge need, because people basically started coming to us once they saw what we were doing for them. And we got plugged into all sorts of workflows, institutional workflows. IRB started coming to us. Of course, the sponsored research office always came to us. But basically all the research support centers, for example, we have a large social sciences research support center. So that serves a very large number of departments. And so they engaged with us a couple of times. Oh, this is perfect. You can just be part of our pipeline here. And so basically, very quickly, we got plugged into all these different pipelines, and researchers, once they sort of got a taste of it, they just started coming to us. So within just a single year, we were reaching, I mean, not exactly probably 50% of all faculty, but very significant fraction of the faculty. And this wasn't just the compliance-driven compliance-driven areas such as health and all. This was all over the map. So these are, physicists would come to us, for example, and especially when we started giving presentations in faculty meetings about the integrity, the integrity attacks, and that seemed to actually that caught their attention. And the other thing that I mentioned was that we were not really presenting this in terms of cybersecurity. It was more like, okay, you come to us, we'll make sure that your research is not slowed down. That was the way we presented it. And also in terms of those 3 other things, the efficiency, trustworthiness, and reproducibility, which is what they understand. And even better, that they understand the dollar. So in other words, if you're not out there wasting your effort doing these things, then you could be writing proposals and getting more money and competing for things that have stronger or stricter cybersecurity requirements. So that's another sort of big thing, and that message really gets through to folks. So anyway, so the metrics are very, very good, very excellent metrics, and I'm very pleased to see that this seems to be taking. And I consider this to be my parting contribution to IU, because I don't think I'm going to be sticking around very much longer, retiring soon. So there are 3 components to SecureMyResearch: consulting, advocacy, and self-service. Consulting is obvious. It's basically one-on-one consulting with absolutely any cybersecurity compliance issue. that's slowing down researcher. Again, I'm going to say things which are very researcher centric, but we're consulting other stakeholders as well, as I said. The service had to be easy to access, so it's just a single email address that they need to know. And the other thing that it becomes clear to researchers once we engage with them is that this isn't just like addressing the ticket they just sent in. So we get in there and we say, well, what exactly is your research? What are you trying to do? So we're actually establishing long-term relationships rather than just doing some sort of help desk thing, and that's probably what brings these people back. The kinds of things we're doing for them is we're helping a lot with grants, contracts, and data use agreements. So we are providing the institutional interpretation for cybersecurity and compliance in any grant, contract, and DOA. So Office of Research Administration would send them to us, or they would simply ask us, okay, what does this mean? And also, can IU support this kind of research? And so we basically provide those kinds of answers. Also, things like providing security boilerplates. If they use central systems, we can give them all those kinds of services as well. If they involve us early enough in proposals, then we can help put in security, which is very rare, obviously, as we all know. All proposals go in at the 11th hour, so this is not something that I realize is really realistic. But still, there have been some large proposals, particularly after we've engaged with someone and they come to know us. Then the next time they're doing something, then we're able to get into the loop there. But and of course, most importantly, working with sponsored research to negotiate things out, which seems to be something that you can do. Probably won't work with DFARS, but I know we have been able to do this for HIPAA, at least for several contracts. And actually, it's one DFARS. I was quite surprised that we were able to get that out, but it was a subcontract. We were not the prime contractor, so we were able to. And in fact, most of our DoD contracts are with the School of Medicine, so it's not the typical things that you would suspect. The engineering like Purdue would have, for example, or places like that. And of course, we get involved, engage with research projects, and we really just understand use cases and recommend solutions, and often design these things like all workflows. So the idea is end-to-end security. So that means we can't just say, okay, go use the system. I know we understand the whole workflow, and you say, okay, this is what you have to do. You have to secure your own desktop, and here's where you go to do that, and I'll show you that in a second. We also help with any compliance security documentation they may have to create, and most of them never had to do that until this DFARS thing came along. There's a lot of HIPAA research, as you know, but it's not a requirement, institutional requirement or HIPAA requirement that they do this. The institution has to have a HIPAA program. They have to have their documentation, and the Health and Human Services is good with that. When it comes down to the researcher level, that's something that we're going to help them with. They also have us come and take a look at like their project, and are we doing the security correctly, or is there security in there, or if not, then what should we do? The second thing we do is advocacy, which is when we go out there, we're kind of engaging directly with researchers. And so if you see something which is upsetting them, some institutional policy or whatever it is, because we're not coming in as a governance sort of a unit, they generally speak to us and tell us what's bothering them, and we're able to take that message back to the to the powers that be and try to do something about it. And we've succeeded in doing some of these things, maybe not change policies, but certainly lots of web places like IRB applications, which had some crazy workflow that wasn't really necessary, and to get that changed. So I'm going to get to documentation now. That's it. I'm sorry. Oops. So self-service piece of it, as I said, is the documentation piece. And the idea here was that since I didn't know exactly how much traffic or how much use we were going to get, the service is going to get, we couldn't simply assume that 2 FTs were going to be enough. So we had to build something in. Also, the other issue was that people want something now, especially the researchers. So we decided to do documentation. And the other reason was it was actually to address problems with existing documentation. So there was documentation to help folks with. And I'll show you what I mean by this. But it wasn't sufficient. So actually, I think I can go to that now, and let's see if I can view full screen maybe. So this is our knowledge base. And so let's say that some researcher wants to share data. And so they say share. You get a lot of stuff here, right? So you say, well, okay, share data is what I want to do. So you go there and okay, you get one thing here. Now you have to go through all this stuff. You have to have some sort of pre-knowledge to be able to use this properly. And this was a problem, especially with people, like in clinical research, as I mentioned. Let me go back to my presentation here. And so this, we have to address that somehow. As I said, it was dense, returned too many irrelevancies, and just people were not, they just don't have the patience to go through this thing unless there's something immediately obvious. So when we started building this documentation, self-service documentation, it had to cover common research use cases. It had to incorporate this desire that researchers had, which was tell us what to do. Don't ask us to do security. Tell us what to do for this thing we want to do. And then the answers had to be immediately usable, no delays. So what we ended up doing then is, after much thinking, fortunately, over the years that I had done this clinical research cybersecurity, I had actually documented the kinds of use cases that users were coming to me with. And so what we did was we decided we'll simply take those use cases, and then for those use cases, we would create recipes, basically step-by-step instructions on how to get that stuff done. And these recipes would have pre-secured, and compliant systems, pre-approved, institutionally provided ingredients that have security baked in. So we're, to the extent possible, we will not ask them to do security. Or at least it would not look like they're being asked to do security. And so what we ended up doing was to create, as I said, we created this cookbook. And instead of showing you the slide, let me go to the actual cookbook. And this, by the way, is accessible by anyone, so you can go to it. It's go.iu.edu/cookbook. So like you saw when I typed share data in the other one, you got all kinds of stuff. So I think my insight was that when you put in something here, it has to return only use cases. It has to return what the researcher wants right now. So they want to share data with IU and external collaborator, something like that. So that's the only thing it could return. It had to be some sort of a, I call this a use case. So this is what they want to do. And then if you go to that, then what it gives you is step-by-step directions. And it may send them to a knowledge-based document, but it's clearly articulated. And also, if that particular workflow or that recipe, as we call it, if they could use that recipe for, let's say, protected health information, then it would be here. It would say that this is approved for if you wanted to use it. If you follow these instructions, you don't have to worry about compliance either. So just put it up here. Here's all our different recipes. We call them recipes. And if it's something that you're interested in, of course, the use cases there, you simply map it to wherever you have it on your campus. So this is our and so this documentation that we call it the cookbook, has been it took a little while for it to get going or get known, I guess, because researchers still want to just talk to us. They want a warm body kind of thing, but now the time has passed. And the other thing I want to mention before I go there is is then what we did was we also grouped the recipes by different research areas, the kinds of use cases that are most common to those areas, and also by kinds of topics and kind of what the regulations. So if you clicked on HIPAA, for example, we don't have much for DFARS, but if you clicked on HIPAA, it would show you all the recipes that were approved, so to speak, for that kind of data. And so, as I said, just to summarize key features, it returns what the researchers want to do. It tells them what to do. It speaks the right lingo. It actually hides security in sort of plain sight. And what it's doing is consolidating disparate sources. We can send them to other websites and so forth, but the structure of the recipe is such that at least they know where to get started. And so what we have seen is in the I think it's actually the first year we had 1,400 unique users, so that's 1,400 researchers, which doesn't seem like a large number when you have millions of hits and so forth. But that's actually a very substantial number for this kind of a resource. And 7,500 hits, so that's how many pages they were looking at and that sort of stuff. And now that we've had some feedback from researchers, it's an extremely popular resource now on campus. And in fact, I often hear from people from outside IU, and they said, we use this recipe because often the actual steps are things that you could use. It's not necessarily IU specific. You could just simply, replace the IU things with whatever they had. So I think this approach has been fairly successful. I wouldn't call it wildly successful in the sense that, yeah, like I said, we don't have millions of hits, but I think that's to be expected. Now, as far as simplifying compliance docs are concerned, my view is again very different here as well. What we did when we did when we, as I said, moved to the NIST RMF is we created 853 system security plans for all our research systems. Again, these weren't compliance documents per se, but they were documentation as part of the risk management framework. And as part of this exercise, we also created what we call enterprise common controls. So these are controls which are applicable at the institutional level, or like, let's say, data center controls. So data center controls, the IU data center, those are applicable to all of the central systems. So therefore, there's a separate set of documents. And a particular system security plan would simply point to it. So there's a hierarchy of documents. And again, because we had sort of the benefit of time, we had templates which were pre-filled for a particular type of system. So let's say there's a system that's got that has a web server and a database server, and there are different VMs. That's a good example. Then that's a very prototypical system. Lots of systems look like that. And so we created we would create an SSP that simply is pre-filled because we did this for an existing system. So we just made that into a recipe. So we had also templates. So we had lots of such templates. So when a new system needs to be brought into, as I call it, needs to be joined to the framework, then we basically just use one of these things. It doesn't take us a lot of time to do this. So a lot of this stuff is very heavy lifting at the very beginning, but once you have it in place, it actually makes life very much easier. Of course, if we have to do DFARS, self-assessed DFARS, I would simply use these because all the 801.7 controls map. But with the CMMC, I'm not so sure. I think you may still have maybe stuck with enclaves, but so far we have some contracts with DFARS, and I have not used any enclaves for that. I'm using the existing systems because I believe that those 801.7 controls can be fulfilled or could be thrown out of scope by you can do that, but who knows how the third-party assessors will view it, and that's the unknown. So when we have had to do these documents, and there haven't been that many instances where we had to do this, and that's probably why we're able to do it, is we simply work with them and we we would create this document for them and give it to them for them to own, but we will work with them and not so much create it for them, but work with them. Because part of the exercise, from my perspective of writing an SSP, is training, because compliance doesn't excite me at all. It's compliance by in and of itself is useless. I think it's the security part. It's where it what its goal is in some sense is the interesting part. So for example, when we sit down with our central IT folks and we say, well, they have to deal with compliance, they get all very, they get riled up and stuff. And then I said, no, this is something where, it's basically like I think of it as a training exercise. And then we sit down and we sit all together and, like this socialize together and write these controls. And they've never seen something like an 853 control catalog in their lives. So it's nice because then they get to see this. I said, did you ever know there was a control called detonation chambers? And that's enough to get their interest, get them interested to go at least peruse through these. So as I said, a little bit, you might be a little disappointed because I personally don't think researchers are ever going to be able to write an SSP. You could certainly give them a template and you could fill it out, but because of the range of use cases the researchers have, I think it's just going to be very difficult to do this. We have tried it a couple times with complete failure, which means that in the end we had to do it anyway. We had to do that. And so we simply just do that. If we had to do it for thousands of SSPs, clearly I would have to then come up with some other way of doing it. But right now the numbers are quite reasonable. It's tens of them. I think we could probably do it even if it was hundreds of them per year, but beyond that, I think we'd start running into issues. So conclusions, I'll conclude and we'll sort of open it to a discussion. I don't think we need to give them research security and compliance docs because they're certainly not voluntarily go look for them. So what you do is you basically hide this into give them documentation that actually helps them do what they need to do, and then you put security in there. And it's okay to ask them to do security thing. It's just that you can't say go learn this thing, learn about, I don't know, firewalls or something, because that's a bit much, but you know what I mean. If you're going to put it in something like a knowledge base, then I think it's very useful that it returns verbs rather than just just the sorts of things you saw in the KB. They're always looking for someplace, someone to go to. That's still very much the preferred way of preferred method for researchers. They just want to talk to someone. And the other thing, well, I already said the last one. So just in terms of challenges, having talked to many campuses, often this FTE resources is a very big issue. And so at least in a couple of cases, I, for example, was able to help them with some of the things that we had done, and they were able to go out and find some things on their own. So that's one way of going about it. The second one is they're decentralized or again, not enough resources to try this approach on a small scale, because it's not just, it depends on a lot of different things. It's like politics, or I don't know how E got out of it, but if it's politics, you have to play politics, obviously. But if you if you don't have the local expertise, then I think a community like this is going to be very useful, because I think we're all kind of in the same boat. We can talk to each other and help each other out. So I'm happy to talk to you, spend time if necessary. And again, if you are just starting, I think so what to do. I think that this is something we did, is to write down exactly what we have. In other words, who the stakeholders are, what they do. If we were to provide a service, what would we want from them, or what sorts of things they might come to us with. And by the way, we have all this thing written down. I think I mentioned this somewhere else, that I'm actually putting together a kind of a whole a paper, let's call a white paper, basically that has all the documents that we created, and we make it available to everyone. But that was very helpful to know exactly who is out there, who does what, who is the strategic partner that we should work with, and we should go see what pain points they have and see what we can do for them or with them. And this I think has been a key to success, other than the things that I've shown you, because as I said, everyone is connected at this point, and I can send researchers to them if necessary, and they can send researchers to us. So it's a complete ecosystem at this point. That's very important. So inventory everything that's there in place, or things that can be leveraged, for example, to help researchers. And I think with that, I will stop, and I will open the floor to questions. Oh, sorry, took more time than I thought I would.
Well, there are some questions that people asked in the doc. One of them is there any public documentation of some of these anti-science attacks that you know of?
I think there's some hearsay. There's one at least here, local attack, where we have a researcher that basically in computer science or informatics who basically does research in this fake news and the fake information sort of that's going on, and his website and his machines are actually being attacked quite regularly. So it's not exactly an integrity issue, but this I mean, I could see that happening there, but I think they're just simply upset with him and they just want to bring things down. It's going to be an availability sort of issue. As far as the integrity thing is concerned, I think mostly it's based on, I think it's either FBI or it's NSA, I forget exactly which agency, but they're predicting these integrity attacks as kind of the next series of things, especially, and not just with research, I mean, in general. I think some of that has happened with COVID. Some websites have been hacked and with wrong information there, for example. Obviously, normally they go there and just want to trash the site, but there have been cases. We're kind of trying to get a inventory of this as well. So I don't have that yet, but once I have it, I'm happy to provide that.
What unit does the SecureMyResearch report to?
Does what?
Does it report to
Oh,
organization?
report to it. Yeah, it reports to the office of vice. It reports to the vice president for IT, so our CIO, to who also our information security office reports to. But we are a peer rather than a direct. So we don't report to the information security office.
What are the skill sets of the two people, the two FTE that are doing this work that you're talking about?
So this is the stickiest point. Cybersecurity itself, I mean, those skills are, let's say, somewhat easily found. But that's the minimum it takes to do this stuff. What basically it needs is someone that has some understanding of research. You must understand research, at least talk to some people or attend, Mike or Sid's workshop or something like that. So you have to have, basically you have to have empathy, first of all. You have to understand that researchers are not the weak link in the chain. It's just that's because the institution is not able to provide them with what they need. So I think that kind of attitude is self-defeating in my opinion, even though I myself had that, I have to admit, some years ago. And the second thing is really this different way of looking at support, which is that you really have to look at this as enabling the mission, basically. This is not about, I don't think we want to think in terms of preventing breaches, which is, I think, is obviously you're doing that as well, but it's about making sure that they can get their research done quickly. This kind of attitude, I think it's a lot of attitude adjustment type of stuff. With cybersecurity, often I see this very top-down attitude, which is fine in enterprise cybersecurity because it's a high-level thing. But once you start dealing with these researchers, that kind of mindset just doesn't help. So I think it's a mindset thing. And this is why I call this research cybersecurity a new field. So right now, for example, I'm an anomaly because I was a researcher that started doing research computing and then cybersecurity and compliance. I don't think there's any such other person. If you have one, then please let me know so I can ask them to also create new people. So what I'm doing right now is basically hire. So I hired a guy who was a sysadmin with some security background, and I did this attitude adjustment. Spent basically 6 months to make sure that he understood all of these things. And in 6 months, he was able to really get this and was able to come up to speed. And I didn't have to sit and watch everything he did at that point. So in terms of expertise, I think that the expertise is cybersecurity, some sort of some technical background with system administration and something like that. But mostly understanding research and that empathy piece of it, having done some support work where you understand where the users are coming from. Listening is a pretty important skill. So these sort of things and are very important. And as I said, this thing I'm writing actually has this very enumerated in very great detail of what you don't want to do. So I think that's kind of a longish answer to that question.
Okay. Another question is, have you gotten requests on cybersecurity around cloud-based research solutions?
Yes. Yes, we have. We actually are helping many researchers, which is nice because they were just doing their own thing. And we didn't. No one at central IT or central security office knew anything about what they were doing. So because the word has spread, they are actually coming to us now. And so they either, in most cases, they already had some kind of a cloud project ongoing. They just wanted to ask us if they were doing things right. In some cases, they were going to launch a new cloud project, and they came in. And part of it is again because of this, as I said, this network that we have. So the folks centrally that through which you have to go in order to provision cloud at IU. They also send people to us when it's sensitive data or some other like human subjects data or some kind of data that needs some kind of protection, or they just want integrity protection, for example. So indeed, that is actually very nice. And actually, someone came to us recently 6 months ago, and they had heard enough about this stuff that they wanted us as consultants on their FISMA project, and so we actually just completed a GCP cloud enclave, which is FISMA compliant and has just been third-party assessed. And I thank Eric a lot because he sent me, he recommended the third party that did the assessment. It was very nice. So yes, we're doing cloud, and in order to do this, we are having to learn cloud security, which it was kind of a shock to me because I'm very OS-centric sort of sysadmin type. So yes, that's
another question is, do you think that the success of your unit and your work is largely due to the fact that you have a mature computing platform that can support HIPAA data? In other words, if an institute is just fresh at this and they don't have a lot of infrastructure, how would they go about doing what you're doing?
It would be very difficult. I mean, I'm assuming that most people are going to have to build enclaves or some sort of a system because doing it on some researcher system is going to be very difficult or impossible. So I think the answer to that question is, indeed, in our case, I mean, we're somewhat of an exception. So I'm not suggesting that what we did was common. We just got started early fortuitously, but I think you have to have, in order for there to be actual reduction of risk due to research, you have to provide secure things to them, and so you have to have secure solutions. And if not, then again, then you would basically use this kind of service to work individually with them and try to secure it as best as it can be secured. But having some sort of infrastructure, I think, is quite essential.
Okay. Do you use NIST 853 as your primary compliance standard to address common controls with other frameworks like HIPAA or CUI.
Correct. Yeah. So as I said, we used HIPAA, and then I stopped using HIPAA as the standard and went to 853. And we basically say there's a page at the end of our SSP says C866, which is basically how HIPAA maps to 853. So the nice thing about 853 is, and again, we were able to do it for sort of fortuitous reasons, but the nice thing is that everything maps to it. It's so comprehensive that at least the controls are there. You may not have them in place, but at least you could bring them in if necessary, if you have to do compliance. As I mentioned, the way we do it is not compliance-ish kind of thing. We're using it in the way that RMF is supposed to be used. But yeah, the long answer again, yes. This is our single compliance framework for all compliance.
On that note, looks like we are at time, but I have committed in chat that we will look at the rest of the questions that weren't answered. And I will say that I can get the recording and the notes as well as the slide deck up by probably tonight at some point. So there you go. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this talk as well. And I can tell by the comments that we all did. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anurag.
Yeah. See you all.